Hi friends, we're going to talk about breakfast and nutrition in this video chat. I think this is video chat number 2, right? Now before I get to our discussion about breakfast, does this look familiar to anyone? If you're a baby boomer, this bread was heavily marketed on television during the 1950s and 60s, and it's Wonder Bread, of course. And I remember those commercials, and I used to want my parents to buy Wonder Bread. Why? Because Wonder Bread had a slogan that it helps build strong bodies 8 ways. So compared to other breads, this was the one that you maybe remember as a kid growing up. I also remember when I was in college, I think it was that Roman meal came out. I still see Wonder Bread. I haven't been able to find Roman meal. So it's a lesson, nothing is forever, right? So the point here now in this video chat is to be cognizant of not only the importance of breakfast, we don't want to skip it, we want to have something nutritious, and I don't mean coffee and donuts. So what might we have for breakfast that's going to be nutritious, keeping in mind a few very important facts? One of the most important of those facts is this, that older men, get this, actually require more protein than younger men. So I'm in my mid-60s and I need more protein than a 20-year-old guy does, a college student. And you might not think that is true, but it is true, and there is research behind it. Now, on top of that, if I'm engaged in strength training, my protein requirement has just gone up, has increased even more. So it's really important that we track our protein intake, and we need to get protein throughout the day, not just at one meal. Somebody would make a mistake if they thought that, oh, I'll just eat very lightly or sparingly during the day and have a big meal at dinner and eat all of my protein at dinner. That's not a wise strategy. We should be consuming 20 to 40 grams of protein per meal and have multiple meals per day. And I've actually written about that in my Old Man Muscle Handbook at length, this idea of the importance of diet and nutrition for older men. So you can get more details certainly by reading. But I want to move on from the discussion of Wonder Bread to looking at 3 different sample breakfasts. And as we do this, we're going to see that the foods that are included in these breakfasts run the gamut from unprocessed to lightly processed to, I would say, more heavily processed. And some folks are against processed foods, but I caution you, yogurt can be a very healthy food, particularly from the standpoint of protein that it provides, just as can a 100% juice, like orange juice, or I'm going to show you pomegranate juice. These are processed foods, and they're not bad. They're not to be avoided. So let's not fall into the trap of condemning processed foods outright. Some of them are very good, and we're going to look at a breakfast cereal here that is actually going to be helping us to meet our daily protein requirement. And you wouldn't necessarily think of that happening from breakfast cereal, would you? Well, stick with me. We're going to examine these breakfasts right now. So I'm going to try an experiment, and the experiment is that I will have slides here, but instead of just talking over the slides, I'm going to be looking at them and going through them with you. And in other words, I'm going to stay on video talking. So we'll see how that works. So we see here that we're talking about breakfast. This is our first meal of the day after hopefully a restful night sleeping. But we've also been fasting. So we do need to intake some nutrients, some nourishment, and particularly since we have an increased need for protein, we're going to need to take in protein in the morning, starting with breakfast. We don't want to skip breakfast because we'll be skipping a protein opportunity. And it makes me think back to my days, again, as a child and a young boy growing up. We had Wheaties, Breakfast of Champions, and you see it on the slide here. And the box that I happen to have here, I don't want to open it because it's quite a number of years old, but it has Willis Reed on the front. And he was the captain of the New York Knickerbocker basketball team in the NBA in the early 1970s to mid-1970s when they won championships. And I was very proud to have them as my home team. And I was thrilled, quite frankly, with all of those great players. And to see Willis Reed on the the box of Wheaties was just fantastic for me. And of course, I wanted to have Wheaties for breakfast because maybe I would become a champion. You see, that's how that works. But you see on this slide, one of the, I guess, vintage Wheaties boxes that has an image of a baseball player from days gone by. It also happens to be a baseball player out of New York, the Yankees. And some of you can maybe read his signature on there, but I'm thinking if you're a baby boomer, you might have recognized him anyway as Lou Gehrig, very famous baseball player. And the other thing that I remember, I showed you Wonder Bread and now Wheaties. The other thing I remember, of course, along with a lot of you who are boomers, is spinach, because of who? Da, 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 Popeye. That was the one food, though, out of the three that I had difficulty getting into. It just, that spinach out of the can, it always looked great. When Popeye would pop it open, you know, with his strength, he'd squeeze the can and it'd fly into his mouth, and then his muscles would start bulging. But that wasn't working for me as a kid. So another issue, and we see it on this slide, is that as older men, sometimes we're alone and we need to be responsible for preparing our own meals. The temptation that we face, however, is to run out and grab a fast food breakfast, right? Or just have donuts and coffee or something similar. But this is not the best course of action. And instead, with just a little planning, we should be able to purchase a few staple foods and stock the shelves in the kitchen, in the pantry, and the refrigerator and freezer with them so that our meal prep becomes a snap and our strength training is suddenly complemented with a sound nutrition component. This is what we're trying to do now. We're trying to change our behavior, our lifestyle, not just in terms of beginning with strength training, but we have to supplement or support or complement strength training with the right diet. We have to provide enough nourishment, and this is paramount when you think about the protein content of breakfast. This is simply being smart. If we're going to start working out and we don't have good nutrition, we're not going to get the changes, the adaptations, the growth, the strength that we need to develop. Now, I'm going to be talking about what is called the compositional analysis of the breakfast foods that we're going to examine. And that simply means looking at various nutrients and calories. So rather than go into every single nutrient, which would be about 50 potentially, we're going to focus on calories plus just these few. The amounts of fat, sodium, simple sugars, protein, and fiber. And we want to maximize our intake of two of these while watching out for the amounts of the others. The two that we want to maximize are protein and fiber, but we don't want to overdo the calories, the sodium, the sugars, and the fat. So needless to say, a given food may contain additional nutrients that the body needs that I'm not tracking here in terms of just these few nutrients, but keep in mind the foods that we're going to examine, and any food potentially is going to provide an assortment of vitamins and minerals, not just protein and fat and sodium and so forth. And the minerals can be very important, like calcium, iron, potassium, magnesium. And then there's bioactive molecules that are not energy nutrients like protein, fat, or carbohydrate, and are not vitamins and minerals, but function as antioxidants and anti-inflammatory substances. And these can be extremely important to have in the diet, especially as we age. And we get a lot of those substances if we consume a plant-based diet. So we want to be thinking about that always. Are we simply consuming dairy and meat and not a whole lot of plant-based foods? That wouldn't be smart. So again, it's a behavior change issue. So let me start now on this slide talking just briefly about calories. If breakfast were to make up one of 3 daily meals for us, and that would be the minimum, because we're needing to probably have closer to 5 meals a day. Not all big, but 5 spread out meals. And you'll see the reason why in a bit. So if breakfast were one of, just for simplicity, 3 meals a day, then it should supply 1/3 of the total calories that we would be taking in each day. So if we were on a 2,000 or 2,100 calorie per day diet, which would be healthy for a lot of us, that might even be a weight loss diet for some of us. It's really subject to individual differences in height, weight, body composition. It's an imperfect measure, but it gives us a marker. So let's say 2,100 calories are what our goal is to take in each day. That would mean 1/3 of that, or 700 calories, would be sufficient or most for breakfast. We shouldn't have more than that. And that might be followed by a snack, mid-morning snack, and then lunch, and then a mid-afternoon snack, and we can consider these snacks as mini meals, and then dinner, okay? So we would need to adjust the calories down from 700 if we have these other mini meals or snacks, as I'm saying. But anyway, it gives us a target. We don't want to have a breakfast that's over 700 calories, for sure. Now, what about fat? We need fat in the diet. Fat gets vilified and people try to avoid fat, but certain fats are absolutely essential because they contain what are called EFAs, essential fatty acids. And if you think of the fat that's in fish and that are in plants, nuts, seeds, and so forth, these are all healthy fats. In fact, there's one in beef brisket. It's the C18 C18 saturated fatty acid, stearic acid, that is actually healthy. And there's been research done on that, and a lot of it coming out of Texas A&M University, Dr. Steve Smith. Now, eliminating or restricting fat in the diet is not wise. As older men, I'm going to tell it to you this way, with dwindling testosterone levels, we would need to recognize how the body uses fat, and specifically cholesterol coming from animal fats, to synthesize this key strength hormone. So if we eliminate fat or go on a fat-reducing diet, we don't eat eggs and so forth, don't expect to have robust testosterone levels, and therefore don't expect to get results from strength training like you could. But at the same time, since fat is the most calorie-dense energy nutrient, what this means is we have to watch out and limit the amount of fat. So how much is limiting? And I would put it this way, generally speaking, if we can consume no more than 20 grams or so of fat, mostly the healthy fats now, per meal on average, we would be doing just fine. So we can have that as a target. And so when we do the analysis of these 3 breakfasts, let's see if we're keeping the fat content at 20-ish grams or below. And we'll do the same thing for these other nutrients. Sodium, let me mention sodium. You know that sodium is one of 2 elements that make up table salt, or sodium chloride. The problem with sodium is it's pervasive in the food environment, processed foods especially. Very easy then to overconsume sodium, and this puts our health in jeopardy. Why? Because excess sodium in the diet is strongly linked to hypertension, which is high blood pressure, and also to electrolyte imbalance. So just how much is too much? Well, what Americans consume on average is about 3,400 milligrams of sodium per day. That's the average. Is that too much? Yes, it is. The dietary guidelines for Americans are recommending that we limit our sodium intake, our daily intake, to less than 2,300 milligrams per day. And that's only about a teaspoon of salt spread throughout all of the foods that we consume in a day, which also tells me don't add any salt using the salt shaker to any foods, to any meal, because then you're going to be way over. So we have to be very careful with sodium. It's all over the place in processed foods, and this is one reason why some folks are against processed foods. But there are processed foods that are low sodium or almost devoid of sodium. A lot of the foods that I'll be recommending throughout the discussion of breakfast, lunch, and dinner, if they're plant-based and they're either unprocessed or lightly processed, we're going to see very low sodium contributions. That's the way to go. So now we have an idea of our target intake for sodium. Next, let me mention sugars. So sugars occur naturally in fruits and vegetables, and they are simple sugars: glucose, fructose, and lactose, sucrose, to mention four of them. There's a couple of others that are lesser provided by foods. Now, lactose is fairly specific to milk and dairy products made from milk, whereas the others, as I say, are going to be naturally occurring in a lot of plant-based foods. But the problem is that our processed foods, again, have sugar added, and so we have to be careful. There's a distinction between added sugars and naturally occurring sugars in terms of our intake. And we don't really have to worry about limiting the naturally occurring sugars the way we do if they are added sugars. Now, it's been reported that the average American man consumes about almost 80 grams of added sugar per day, mainly from table sugar use and processed foods. As I say, think of sweetened beverages, for example. That's an item that we tend to overlook because we're drinking it, but we get a lot of sugar unnecessarily through sweetened beverages. So just how much sugar is considered healthy? I'll bet it's not 80 grams a day, right? So according to the American Heart Association, men should be consuming no more than half of that, about 40 grams per day. They actually say 38. And then the U.S. Dietary Guidelines recommends 10% of our total daily calories coming as sugar. 10% of calories, not grams, but calories. So for many, what is that in grams? It turns out to be 50. So the difference between 38 and 50 is really negligible. So it's pretty close to the AHA number. But the point is, if we consume sweets, and I'm talking about desserts and any kind of a snack that is sugary, they don't contain natural sugars. They contain added sugar, table sugar, sucrose usually. High fructose corn syrup, by the way, is a sweetener alternative to sucrose that is pervasive in processed foods. And we consume a lot of that too, potentially. So what we need to do, again, is limit our sugar intake to around 50 grams per day, and we're focused here on the added sugars. So if we eliminate sweetened beverages and sweetened foods and desserts, that's really the way to go. That's a lifestyle change that your body is going to thank you for, and that as you train, as you are strength training, you're going to get better results because of your dietary habits. So the diet and the exercising go hand in hand. If you mess up on one, you can mess up on the other as a result. So you can have a cheat day, we can have a cheat day, but the strength training and a clean diet, a healthy diet, this should be our SMART goal. Cut down on added sugars, cut down on sweetened beverages, maybe just eliminate them most days of the week, and you'll be in good shape. So now we move on to protein, and most people will already appreciate that we need protein in the diet, but many will be unaware that our daily requirement increases as we get older, and I made that point. If we are strength training, it's going to increase even more because our body is going to tear down muscle as we train in a good way, because it's going to actually rebuild it stronger overnight over the next 24 to 36 hours. But in order to do that, there has to be protein around through dietary intake. And these amino acids that are going to be the building blocks of new muscle have to come through the diet. So how much protein do we need? How much is enough? So the funny thing is that the official dietary recommendations for protein are rather meager. 0.8 grams of protein intake per kilogram of body weight, or that translates to 0.36 grams per pound. Okay, so if you're a 100-pound person, that would be 36 grams of protein. If you're a 200-pound person, that's 72 grams of protein. Okay, but this is just to be healthy, no, to be alive, to sustain life and functioning. If you're going to be healthy and robust, and you're going to be strength training and benefiting from the strength training, this is not going to be enough protein. So this is like a minimum amount to ensure that we don't become protein deficient. It's not enough to help us to put on muscle and add strength. So it turns out that the right amount of protein intake for any one individual is really determined by a variety of factors, including their activity level, their age, their present amount of lean body mass or muscle mass, we could say, their goals in terms of their physique and their current state of health, all of these things and more go into the protein recommendation. Now, to gain muscle, the body must be kept in what is called an anabolic state rather than a catabolic one. It must synthesize more muscle protein than it breaks down, is what it is. In other words, there needs to be a net positive protein balance in the body, and I talk about this in my handbook at length. So a common recommendation now, this is the part we need to listen to, for gaining muscle has been 1 gram of protein per pound of body weight. So if I weigh 220 pounds, my target protein intake is 220 grams per day. That is a heaping amount of protein that is difficult to consume, okay, without planning for it and preparing for it. Other scientists have come up with estimates saying the protein needs to be a minimum of 0.7 grams per pound, which is 1.6 grams per kilogram, which is double the initial recommendation that most of the agencies are asking we follow. It's double that. That's what the scientists are saying now, that recommendation of 0.8 grams protein per kilogram is just too low. It's by half, should be doubled. So it's hard to give exact figures due to conflicting study results, but clearly a higher number than the minimum recommendation is what we're looking at here, 0.7 to 1 grams per pound, or 1.6 to 2.2 grams per kilogram of body weight seems to be a reasonable estimate that we can go with. And now we end our discussion of these nutrients with fiber. And fiber, according to the American Heart Association eating plan, we should be consuming 25 to 30 grams a day from food, not from supplements. So there are some fiber supplements that you can take, a tablespoon full of this supplement, and it's a powder, and you mix it with water and drink it down. You can do that, but it's healthier and better in the long term if we get our fiber from food. Why? Because the foods that provide fiber are providing other nutrients as well, which the supplement would not be providing. Now, the current intake, this is bad news for us, among men is about 15 grams, so half of what we should be intaking. We need to make a conscious effort, therefore, to include foods that contain fiber in our diet, starting with breakfast, but also, like with protein, we want to be consuming fiber-containing foods throughout the day so that we can meet the challenge of our requirement. Plant foods, fruits and vegetables, nuts, seeds, peas, beans, lentils, these are traditionally good sources. So now that we've talked about the nutrients that we're going to look for in the foods that we're going to be examining for these 3 sample breakfasts that we can choose to consume, let's move on to doing that very thing right now. So let me look at the slides with you. So this first breakfast, I'm calling it the Greek yogurt breakfast, with your choice of fruit and also containing a wheat germ topping. So you see that there, maybe you would choose a banana, maybe you would choose blueberries, what have you, as the fruit. But you want it to be ideally a fresh fruit, so it's not processed food. The yogurt is of course processed, it's a dairy food, excuse me, but it can be healthy. And particularly the Greek yogurt contains double the protein compared to regular yogurt, so this is the way to go for us as older men. So if we look at 3/4 cups of Greek yogurt, what do we see? 140 calories provided, 14 grams of protein, 60 milligrams of sodium, 18 grams of simple sugars, 0 grams of fiber, 0 grams of fat per tablespoon. So we've got that to consider, and then let's say that we have a sliced banana, and we have the data for the sliced banana there, and then we add a tablespoon of wheat germ. And this is our breakfast, okay? It's 3/4 cups of Greek yogurt with an added banana and a tablespoon of wheat germ. And what is this going to give us? It provides 275 calories. That's way under the 700 maximum, so we're doing really well with calories. It provides 17 grams of protein, which is pretty good, considering it's a very light, easy to prepare, almost instant breakfast. It's a no-brainer for a lot of us who are busy or on the go. Only 61 milligrams of sodium, so we're really doing well there. 32 grams of sugars, so that's a little bit high. 5 grams of fiber, that's something. And then there's almost no fat. So the yogurt provides no fat, the banana provides no fat, and the wheat germ, essentially no fat. So we've got a fairly low calorie, fairly decent amount of protein. Remember, our protein target per meal is 20 to 40 grams of protein. So 17 is almost at 20. So this isn't bad. And of course you could say, well, what if I had instead of 3/4 cup of the Greek yogurt, I make it a full cup, or I make it 2 cups. Well, then of course you're going to get a whole lot more protein and so forth. But I love the fact that the sodium is low. Now, the sugars are in that product, and that's one thing we could be critical of. Why do they have to put the sugars? Well, it helps with the flavor, of course. So if you want to comparison shop and try to find a Greek yogurt that is lower in sugar because you're worried about the sugar content, then go for it. But that's our first breakfast. And something that we should have on the side, a lot of folks are going to have coffee perhaps, but I see a juice, 100% juice, as being a better fit with this particular breakfast. So that pomegranate juice that I spoke about very briefly, mentioned it at least, it's very healthy. It's got a lot of nutrients and bioactive substances that are good for us. So 1 cup of pomegranate juice is going to provide 140 more calories than our breakfast did. No protein, but only 15 grams of sodium, 37 grams of sugars, okay, but these are natural. There's no added sugar if you buy 100% pomegranate juice. No fiber and no fat. And then orange juice, a lot of folks are more familiar with orange juice than pomegranate juice, and it costs a whole lot less, quite frankly. Would have about the same calorie content, down to though 122. No protein, only 5 milligrams of sodium, fewer grams of sugar by far, 21 grams. Has a gram of fiber because you buy the orange juice with the pulp, right? And no fat. So if we consume those breakfasts and we can have some juice on the side with it, that particular Greek yogurt breakfast looks pretty good for us. So I've got two more breakfasts that I want to cover with you, go over with you. And the next one up is what I'm calling the cereal breakfast. And we've got a bowl of cereal, but not just any cereal. This is a Special K protein cereal. And this is one case, and there are other cases that we're actually meeting through this discussion of the food industry stepping up to provide something good for the consumer, even though it's a processed food. And what do I mean by that? Well, if we look at the nutrient composition of a bowl of the Kellogg's Special K protein cereal, 1 cup of that cereal provides only 210 calories, but 15 grams of protein. That's a lot. We think of eggs as providing a lot of protein and a glass of milk, but that's only 6 or 8 grams of protein in those foods. This cereal, 15 grams. And the sodium content is a bit high, relatively speaking, but not absolutely, 260 milligrams. Only 8 grams of simple sugars, 5 grams of fiber, and a little fat, 1.5 grams is all per cup. So what if I put half a cup of blueberries and add that to the cereal breakfast? That's going to give me 50 calories, so not much. No protein, 80 milligrams of sodium, 22 grams of simple sugars, but these sugars are naturally occurring, so we don't worry about them. 3 grams of fiber and then 0 grams of fat. The blueberries are a really good source of antioxidants, and I consume them every day, half a cup of blueberries. Whether I have cereal or not, just eat them. And here in Texas, you can go to the produce section of any supermarket and find fresh blueberries. You don't have to buy the frozen. But if you live in a different area of the country where the fresh blueberries are seasonal, frozen blueberries are fine. They retain almost all of the nourishment and nutrient content compared to fresh, very close. And research has proven that. Now, another component of the cereal breakfast, are you one of those people who eat cereal dry out of the box with no milk in the bowl? Well, I'd love you to get into the habit of having a bowl of cereal with milk. Why? Because we need our protein. You see, we're getting 15 grams from the cereal. But you know, if we add milk, we're going to add to the protein content of the breakfast. And we want how much protein at breakfast? 20 to 40 grams, depending on who we are. If we're a big person, better be close to 40 grams. If we're a smaller person, it can be close to 20 grams. But here's the point. There's a milk, and I'm going to single out the food industry again. They stepped up to the plate and have created, just in our time, this was not available even a couple of years ago. Certainly not when I was growing up. No. Now there's something called Fairlife milk. And instead of having 8 grams of protein in a cup, which would be standard, it's 13. So you add the 13 from the milk contribution and then the 15 from that cereal, and suddenly you've got a whopping amount of protein at breakfast. This is exciting to me. I don't know if you're excited, but I am. So here I'm giving the breakdown of, on the screen here, of our whole milk Fairlife. Now they make a whole milk, they make a 2%, they make a skim. I go for the whole milk because I want that animal fat because of the testosterone connection. And this is healthy fat, and we're getting 150 calories, 13 grams of protein in that cup of Fairlife whole milk, 120 milligrams of sodium, which is not a lot, it's okay, 6 grams of sugars, which is almost nothing, 0 grams of fiber, and 8 grams of fat. I want that fat, as I've said, per cup. So I'm getting the right amount of fat and protein, low sodium, low sugar, no fiber. We don't expect that from milk anyway. And we're almost done. We're adding the tablespoonful of wheat germ to this breakfast as well. It gives us another 30 calories, 2 grams of protein, no sodium, no sugars, 2 grams of fiber, and less than a gram of fat. So you put it all together, and our cereal breakfast gives us a little more in terms of calories than the previous breakfast. It's up to 440, but that's still way lower than 700, which is sort of set as our target limit. 30 grams of protein, there it is. And what if you had 2 bowls of cereal with extra milk? You see how this breakfast can really expand the amount of protein that we intake. 460 milligrams of sodium, 36 grams of sugars, 10 grams of fiber, 10 grams, and 10 grams of fat. So those numbers are not too bad. They're actually very good in certain respects. All right, you ready for the last breakfast? I think I am. And this one I would call, compared to the other two, a processed foods breakfast. Maybe it's also a He-Man breakfast. You remember that term? A He-Man. So what is it? It's an eggs breakfast, but not with bacon. I've substituted something for bacon that, even though it's a processed meat, due to the nature of the product, again, it's the food industry coming up with a change. No preservatives, no nitrates. Did you know they had such a ham, deli ham, available? Now they do. And it's in this breakfast. So what is the breakfast? It's ham and eggs breakfast with beans and mushrooms. All of that. That sounds like a hearty breakfast. So we've got 2 large eggs, half a cup of Bush's Best Steakhouse Grill and Beans, 2 slices of deli fresh smoked uncured ham. And don't worry about it not being safe because it's not cured. No, the way it is processed ensures that it's safe. It's not going to be carrying any pathogenic microorganisms. And then we've got the white button mushrooms. So if you look at the eggs first with me, 2 grade A large eggs supply 140 calories, 6 grams of protein per egg for a total of 12, 140 milligrams of sodium, 0 grams of sugars, 0 grams of fiber, 10 grams of fat in 2 eggs. So this is a healthy food, folks, eggs. And if you don't know it, the nutrition guidance for the United States of America has shifted, historically speaking, in the last iteration of the dietary guidelines, saying essentially that cholesterol in the diet is no longer an issue. So that means we can have an egg a day or 2 eggs, maybe a 2-egg meal 3 times a week. That's what I do, in fact. So unless you're worried for some reason about cholesterol still, you would go to your doctor and get your cholesterol level checked. Start consuming eggs a little bit at a time. Go back to your doctor after, say, 30 days, check your cholesterol, and if it's not spiking, you can handle the cholesterol just fine. And we need cholesterol. We need the kind of fat that eggs provide. And again, for older men, the testosterone connection is viable and real. Now, eggs, if you think about it, an egg would provide in the yolk, but there's also the egg white, which is a nice amount of protein in the egg white. The yolk is providing for the nourishment of the chick, if that were an egg that would be allowed to produce a chick. So there are growth factors in the egg, and growth factors are what our body, when we work out, are looking to obtain from foods from somewhere. If we were infants, we'd be getting them from mother's milk. We'd get growth factors through that nourishment of mother's milk. But I'm just saying that, and I haven't seen any definitive research studies on this, but it just makes logical sense that there are molecules in the egg that we're consuming that are growth factors for the chick. And a molecule is a molecule. And whether or not there's enough in the egg to benefit an adult man in terms of growing bigger and stronger muscles, I don't know, because like I say, I don't see any research specifically to address that. But that would be interesting, and it's certainly a nice theory. And if it works, fine. You know, these bodybuilders of old, and I know we're not trying to be bodybuilders, but it's an illustration. They were consuming ridiculous amounts of eggs. I'm talking about a dozen or 2 dozen per day. And they were getting pretty big on those eggs. This is way before steroids. So maybe those growth factors add up the more eggs that you consume. Alrighty, let's move on from the eggs. So we have 2 eggs on our plate. We've got half a cup of baked beans, and they provide 190 calories, 7 grams of protein, 430 milligrams of sodium, so it's getting up there, 19 grams of sugars, 5 grams of fiber, and 1.5 grams of fat. And this is all in a half cup of baked beans. And the baked beans go great with the eggs and the ham and the mushrooms, I just have to tell you. Now the ham, the Deli Fresh smoked uncured ham, 2 slices, made by Oscar Mayer in this case, 120 calories in those 2 thin little slices. 22 grams of protein, however. And here's the bad part, 940 milligrams of sodium, 2 grams of sugars, 0 grams of fiber, 3 grams of fat for those 2 slices. So we're getting a really nice amount of protein and too much sodium. That's the one negative there. But we'll see how it all pans out in the sum total here. So the last item in our breakfast here for the ham and eggs is the white button mushrooms. And we've got a half a cup, and the way to prepare the mushrooms is very easy. You buy them, of course, fresh. So this is an unprocessed food. Buy them fresh from the produce section of your supermarket. Get them home and take 2 or 3 or 4, depending on their size, and slice them thinly on a microwavable dish and microwave those mushrooms for about 77 seconds. And they'll come out, they'll be noticeably shriveled in size, but they're fully containing and providing all of their nourishment. And there's an interesting thing about white button mushrooms, and I'm talking a lot about testosterone because we need to watch that hormone. It tends to go away as we get older. So we can do things in terms of our diet and also with strength training to build back our testosterone levels. And there's a rumor out there, and I haven't seen research to support it, but there's a suggestion that white button mushrooms can help. So if it gets into your head and it's a placebo effect, but it works as a placebo, then there you go. But at any rate, I thought I'd mention that and encourage you to look into any of these topics on your own. We didn't grow up in my day with the Oracle, meaning Google, and now you can just Google to your heart's content anything, any subject. So you might want to Google white button mushrooms, testosterone, and so forth, and see what you find. If they ever come out with some studies, that should pop up. And anything, like I say, that we can do through the diet, through our lifestyle, to improve our hormonal profiles, because they do shift around, or it does shift around as we get older, and try to bring it back to a more youthful profile. That's all for the good. And again, it's all about supporting our strength training. So here you go. We've got that third breakfast all lined up for us, which totals 460 and a half calories. So not 700, but it's up there. It's getting higher. Look at that, almost 43 grams of protein. Don't you like that? The downside, 1,518 milligrams of sodium, darn it. So they need to come out with a low sodium version of not only the ham, certainly, but the baked beans. Or you could have one slice of the ham and a little bit less of the baked beans, and you'd cut that sodium down. But I think if we are careful about lunch and dinner, it's going to be hard. We still may not go over our 2,300 milligram limit for sodium. What do you think? There's too much sodium everywhere floating around. Anyway, 22 grams of the sugars, 6 grams of fiber, so we're getting some fiber, and 14 and a half grams of fat, okay, for that meal. So again, we wanted to stay under 20 grams of fat, and we were able to do it even with this He-Man breakfast. So which of those 3 breakfasts do you want to start with this week? All right, so we kind of did have one that is very low in sodium, and one that is high in sodium, and one that's sort of in between. Now, all of them provided a decent amount of protein. One of them really did, that last one. So the choice is yours. Again, the suggestion is to mix and match, alternate. If you're like me, you're going to go through a phase where you crave one of those breakfasts several days in a row before you get tired of it. And then you see you have one of the others waiting, and you can switch over to that. So breakfast is not to be skipped. If we do skip it, then our strength training is going to suffer. And this is the reason not to skip it from my perspective here as a strength training coach. And what else we want to say about breakfast? So we're getting ready to close out here. I appreciate you sticking with me throughout this entire video chat. It was a lot longer, turned out, than what I expected it would be. But, you know, we had a lot of things to say, a lot of terrain to cover. So to summarize, I'm looking at the slide, and it shows us the 3 breakfasts: the yogurt breakfast, number 1, number 2, the cereal breakfast, the egg breakfast. Something I'd like to point out here is that none of these breakfasts take long to prepare. So they're all quick and easy. There's no excuse to think that, oh no, I can't be bothered to, do all of that work. There's not much at all. The number 3 probably does take the longest, but not even 5 minutes, and you're eating. The other 2, almost instantly you're eating. So as long as you have the materials, the foods on hand, you're good to go with these breakfasts. And like I say, any one of them is okay. And if you rotate among the 3 of them, then you've got a nice plan for the week. And I want to emphasize the next slide here that I put up. Consider these juices as accompanying your breakfast. So I know you can have coffee, and people want to have coffee because it helps them get going in the morning. I've never had coffee ever in my life, so I'm missing out. I know that. But I do drink juice, and a couple of my favorites here, and orange juice, pomegranate juice, cranberry juice, another one. And also, we must remember to drink our water. In fact, just before breakfast, when we first get up in the morning, we want to have a nice tall glass of water because we've dehydrated slightly overnight during sleep. We hadn't taken in any nourishment, certainly, but no water either. So start off the day with a glass of water, and then start preparing breakfast and have a nice breakfast, get your protein going. And if it's a workout day, so much the better. You're just going to be ready for it, and you're going to be able to assimilate and utilize the nutrients that went into your breakfast plan. So this is all good, and I'm proud of you if you make the lifestyle change, the simple one that we're talking about here for breakfast. So, there we had an examination of 3 different breakfasts. And you could do very well, as could I, to rotate those 3 breakfasts throughout the week. And, you know, if we have to have donuts and coffee one day out of 7 isn't that bad. Much better than 7 days out of 7. So I hope you found the information in today's video interesting and valuable, and that you can apply some of what we discussed. That's always good. Now, in future video chats, I need to cover lunch and also what's for dinner. So I look forward to sharing those programs with you in the upcoming video chat editions of Old Man Muscle. Now, I smell breakfast and I'm hungry. So you'll have to excuse me. I need to go have my breakfast. You have a great day. Thank you for joining me. Bye-bye.